Hi, I'm sci-fi and fantasy author Michael LaVoice, aka LaVoice, in your head. And I'm fitting to talk nerdy with you. Doing a bit of a deep dive today, the infinite punchline. Comic book movies. Are we still laughing? By the time the first Iron Man movie came out, I was already old school with comic book movies and TV shows, mainly because I'd lived through the first series of Superman movies starring Christopher Reeve, multiple Batman franchise attempts, including the Keaton, Kilmer, Clooney, and Christian Bale years. On the small screen, there were years worth of attempts at adaptations of comic books, both animated and live action, including Spider-Man and Captain America in multiple versions, including some really, really genuinely awful made for TV movies. So to me, I was kind of like, okay, cool, I guess. I was never crazy about Iron Man in the comics, mainly because I didn't really like Tony Stark as a character. So the good news here is that RDJ did a well enough job that he made me actually care about Tony Stark as a character. I still don't like him very much, but I cared about him as a character. He had a very serious redemption arc, and I'm an absolute sucker for a redemption arc. Thor was well done. Now, Hemsworth brought very vivid life to a character that I didn't really care for much as a kid in the comics because largely of the way they made him talk. They wrote his dialogue in Elizabethan. Now, for all you kids out there that haven't cracked open a textbook, that means it was written like a Shakespeare play. All the thous and thys and these and theys and very flowery stuff. Thou art a treacherous villain, Loki. It was corny, ultimate cheeseball corny, and I couldn't stand it. The movies, on the other hand, had him speaking regular kind of English. Tom Hiddleston as Loki didn't hurt at all. He's very well played. Even though through all that, I'm still not a huge fan of Thor in the comics, but I am a fan of Thunderstrike. And if you don't know who Thunderstrike is, look him up. He's way cool. So then Captain America the First Avenger came out, and I was blown away by Chris Evans. Chris Evans brought a earnestness and a genuineness to that character that you just don't see every day. I think Chris Evans made us all fall in love with him at the same time that Peggy Carter did. I mean, it helped that the movie was well written. It helped that it had an outstanding supporting cast. You had people like Stanley Tucci, Hugo Weaving, Sebastian Stan, and even Tommy Lee Jones. And that was kind of a redemption moment for me because the last time I saw Tommy Lee Jones in something, it was as Two-Face in Batman Forever. And that was, well, it was kind of awful. I never really gave a rip about the Hulk movies because I didn't care about the Hulk in the comics. I did like the Hulk TV show in the 1970s starring Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. That was also the first place I ever encountered Daredevil as a character because Matt Murdock made a guest appearance on the show for a small arc of episodes. They also had a 1970s attempt at Thor that was even lamer than the comics, if you can believe it. But Matt Murdock was on there for a series of episodes that culminated in the trial of the Incredible Hulk, and that was pretty cool. Black Widow, I had no interest in as a character, and Hawkeye was a joke, just a bargain basement Green Arrow. But I will say that Jeremy Renner and ScarJo did make me care about those characters. So that was a good thing for the movies, I guess. My fandom of Power Man and Iron Fist, collectively known as Heroes for Hire, I was already familiar with S.H.I.E.L.D. and their lesser known cousin, Smile. I know about 80% of you think I just made that crap up. I didn't. It's a real thing. Go find it in the back issues if they're in your local comic store. SMILE stands for Special Military Intelligence Law Enforcement Division. I guess technically that would be smiled, but that's not the point. The point is that I was only conversationally familiar with the Ultimates version of Nick Fury as portrayed by Sam Jackson. To me, at that point in my life, Nick Fury was a one-eyed white guy who looked an awful lot like an older version of David Hasselhoff from the Knight Rider series. I think I like Sam Jackson's version better, if I'm being honest, but I still think it'd be really cool to have a movie where both versions of the character are on screen together. Like, hey, we're doing multiverse stuff, we might as well go for it. If you're interested, David Hasselhoff actually did shoot a pilot for Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And it's out there on YouTube if you can find it. At least the trailer for it is. It's rather entertaining. Give it a look. Captain America, the Winter Soldier, is to many the ultimate Captain America movie, at least to some of my kids. For me, I still think Captain America, the First Avenger is my favorite. Now, right around the same time as Winter Soldier, though, came the Netflix version of Daredevil. I was already familiar with the character, like I said, and I was already familiar with Kingpin as a villain, not only from Spider-Man the Animated Series, but from Spider-Man comics, where he was a main villain in Spider-Man's universe before he started harassing Daredevil. But this version of Daredevil on this show was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and it was nothing short of breathtaking. Jessica Jones, I was kind of meh on because I didn't really know who the character was, despite the fact that we had a former Doctor Who, David Tennant, playing a bad guy on the show, and brilliantly, I might add. Luke Cage, that show was dope. The Luke Cage slash Power Man series, for you guys who don't know, in the comics, Luke Cage was Power Man and Iron Fist, heroes for hire. Okay, but that show had me so stoked for the upcoming Iron Fist show. I just knew we were going to get a Heroes for Hire show, right? Right? No, that's not what we got. What we got with Iron Fist was just as disappointing as Luke Cage was awesome. So much potential squandered, so much lore unnecessarily changed, so much was meddled with. And, for a character that revolves around martial arts, there was very little martial arts action in Iron Fist. It was so disappointing. This made the way they brought Iron Fist into the Luke Cage season 2 that much harder to watch because those writers understood the characters. Those writers understood the dynamic between Luke Cage and Danny Rand. We could have had a whole season or two of that, but no. Then the Defenders came along and just so much no. Again, potential squandered. But by then, after the Defenders, I didn't even want them to make the attempt to do a Heroes for Hire show. Because I was terrified of what they do to it, what they would do to them. Then Avengers Age of Ultron came along, and that was very exciting for me because by this point, I was completely in love with Paul Bettany as the voice of Jarvis, the AI that runs Iron Man's suits. And to see him become the culmination of what Ultron was supposed to be and what Jarvis already was as the Vision, that was about the best bit of icing on a rather cool cupcake that I could get. Scarlet Witch, I didn't really care about as a character in the comics, and so I didn't really care about her in the films, but Miss Olsen did a good job with her. Quicksilver, to me, was just another poor imitation. Bargain basement Flash, and I didn't really care. So let's also remember, though, that while all this was going on, you had the Arrowverse kicking off on the CW. And that brought us shows like, of course, Arrow and The Flash and The Legends of Tomorrow and Supergirl, which started out on CBS, bombed, and then moved to the CW and became unrecognizable and bombed again. And then, of course, we got Superman showing up on the Supergirl show and eventually getting his own show with Superman and Lois, which turned out to be a lot better and a lot better written than the Supergirl series ever thought about being. And somewhere along all of this, the Snyderverse kicked off, and tried desperately to imitate the success of the MCU and failed miserably. Now they're trying to recover that now with James Gunn in charge of things like Superman, and the Lanterns TV show was originally developed by Greg Berlanti way back in the day. But now Gunn is in charge of everything. I actually have a little hope for that show based on the performance of Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner in the Superman movie, but we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. I mean, he could be great and the rest of the show could suck. I just don't know at this point. We don't have enough information. We've only had a couple of stills released from the show, and I've already talked about those in previous videos. We're not going to rehash all that. The Spider-Man movies were great. I liked the Tobey Maguire movies a little bit. I didn't like what they did to Spider-Man in those movies, like the changing of the power set. In the comics, Spider-Man's being able to stick to walls was always an advanced form of static electricity. Didn't have anything to do with little barbs that creepily came out of his fingers. And of course, they took away the web shooters and gave him natural webbing, which was just ew, gross. I know I'm not the only person that made the joke about him shooting webs out of his butt. So I was also kind of mad at Sony for not giving Andrew Garfield a third installment with his run as Spider-Man. I wanted to see him come back from Gwen Stacy's death, and I really wanted to see him take on the Sinister Six. Maybe we'll get that in the future. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. I wasn't crazy about their version of the Rhino anyway, so meh. I did like the new Spider-Man movies where they took Peter Parker back to high school. It was kind of an Ultimates version, like Ultimate Spider-Man version template for them. And it's kind of weird though because Aunt May just keeps getting younger and younger. It's really kind of weird. I skipped the Venom movies entirely because I had zero interest in watching Night Psychopath be turned into any kind of a protagonist. Same thing for Kraven the Hunter. Zero interest. Guardians of the Galaxy shook things up a little bit, along with Doctor Strange. Now, I was familiar with Doctor Strange already from the comics as a kid, and I already knew who Rocket Raccoon was from a limited series that they did on him back in the day. But, the movie version, as voiced by Bradley Cooper, was way better than the comic book version ever thought about being. I really enjoyed that. So much better. But to be honest, by the time Infinity War and Endgame came around, I was kind of ready for a break. So I took one. I skipped the Inhumans because I didn't care about them as a comic book series, so live action was going to sweeten the pot for me. I skipped Ant-Man and the Wasp, Cloak and Dagger, which I liked them as a comic, but I skipped the show. I definitely skipped Captain Marvel because the House of Mouse was just basically starting to undo itself with that one, changing their lore within the movies that were still just relatively fresh. Not to mention the self-destruction of Brie Larson. That's another topic. I watched WandaVision, which I regret. Same for Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Oh boy, was that bad. And to a degree, Loki, though there was a lot to like about Loki as a show. It's just some of it was just very, very cringe. Black Widow and Shang-Chi were ultimate, absolute cringe. The Eternals, I skipped them because, again, I didn't care about them as a comic. Hawkeye, the TV show on Disney Plus, was guilty of a lot of the same ideological sins that infected Moon Knight, the Multiverse of Madness, and eventually Thor: Love and Thunder. Now, Black Panther was okay, the first one, but I skipped Wakanda Forever because to me, Shuri is not a hero. Shuri is a gal in the chair. She's the tech person. She's the genius. Arguably, maybe even smarter than Stark, but not a hero. I think, honestly, they should have recast Chadwick Boseman. But again, like I often say, they didn't ask me. Miss Marvel and She-Hulk were more ideologically driven dribble that I skipped. Guardians 3 was okay, still kind of meh. I skipped Captain America Brave New World, and I wish I had skipped Thunderbolts. So far, I've not been able to sufficiently motivate myself to watch Daredevil Born Again. Mainly because of how the characters of Wilson Fisk was treated in Hawkeye and how Daredevil was treated in She-Hulk and Echo. Do you see where this is going? There's just as much content now as there was back then. Arguably, maybe even more. Why am I skipping so much of it? Because the writing has changed so much. It's been infected with so much ideology. They keep pulling the same kind of bait and switch that they did with Rey and Star Wars and old what's her face and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If the movies were well written with worthy characters being run through the meat grinder of the plot, if the plots were constructed on this, therefore this, but this, therefore this, instead of this happens, then this happens, then this happens. If they were done that way, and then the characters came out on the other end significantly changed, for better or worse, then I'd be in. I'd be all in, because I'm all about character development and coming out on the other end different. But it's sad to say that what we're getting, and what we've been getting for a while now, is we're being forced to accept that a character is great just because they say they are, or some other person on the show says they are, without any real demonstration of that greatness that's believable. And with that, I'm just kind of out. What do you think? Experiencing a little superhero burnout? A little comic book movie fatigue, maybe? Let's talk about it in the comments and come back next time when I get to be LaVoice in your head.